Hi everyone, welcome to Storytime for this week. We have a great story for you today. It's one of my favorite from when I was a little kid. It's called Puss in Boots. Now some of you might know Puss from the Shrek movies or his own movie. So this is going to be his story, kind of how he got famous and how we read books about him now or watch movies with him in it. But before we go ahead and do our story, we are going to want to do our hello song. And remember, it's going to go, hello, friends. Hello, friends. Hello, friends. It's time to say hello. You guys ready? Hello, friends. Hello, friends. Hello, friends. It's time to say hello. Great job, guys. So as you can see, we have our board up and we have some letters on that board. So we've got our letter C, our letter A, and our letter T. And all together, those three letters are going to make the word cat because that's what Puss is. He's a cat. Puss is another name for a cat. So again, we've got our C that makes the K sound like carrot or crunch or cookie. Our A, which makes the A sound like apple. And our T, which makes the T sound like trouble. And again, go ahead, say all those sounds together with me one more time. We're going to go cat. You guys are so good at this. But our story starts, like all good stories starts, with once upon a time. So once upon a time, there was a miller who had 3 sons. And a miller is somebody who makes grain. They take all the yummy grain from the ground and they help make it into flour so that we can bake bread and all sorts of good things. So our miller had 3 sons, but one day he passed away. He didn't have much to leave them, so he left the mill to his oldest son. To his middle son, he left his donkey, and to his youngest son, right here, all he had to leave was his cat. Now, the youngest son was pretty upset. He didn't have any money, and now he didn't even have a place to live. All he had was a cat. But the cat was Puss in Boots. He didn't have his boots just yet, but he looked at his owner and he said, "Master, don't worry. I will help you find your fortune. All you need to do is buy me a fine pair of boots and bring me a sack, and I will make sure that you become rich and never go hungry." Well, the miller's son was pretty surprised to hear a talking cat. He was so surprised that he decided he was going to listen to Puss in Boots. So he took what little money he had and bought the best pair of tiny little boots, just the right size for a cat. And then he brought Puss his sack. Well, Puss was a very smart cat, so he knew just what to do. He put on his brand new boots and he took his sack and he went into the woods and he walked through all the prickly brambles, but they didn't hurt him, they didn't scratch him because he had his nice boots on. And he took his sack and he laid a trap. In the trap, he set the sack, and in the sack was some tasty, crunchy lettuce. Now, he rigged up a snare so that he could pull the sack closed once something hopped in. And pretty soon, little bunnies came hopping, and they smelled that lettuce. And guess what they did, guys? Those silly bunnies jumped in the sack and Puss pulled the rope, and the sack swooshed closed with the bunnies inside. Well, these were very nice bunnies. They were very fat and very big. So Puss went ahead and he went to the castle where the king lived with his daughter, the beautiful princess. And he brought the bunny to the king as a gift. He went up to the king and he said, "King, I have a gift of rabbits for you from the Marquis of Carabas," which is what he decided he was going to call his owner. Even though his owner didn't own any land, Puss made up a fancy title to give him so that he would sound impressive to the king. Well, the king really liked rabbits, so he was very impressed with what Puss brought him. And Puss said that it is no trouble at all. We have many, many fine rabbits. So the king told Puss he would be so grateful if Puss could bring him more rabbits. And that's what Puss did. He took his sack, and every few days he went into the woods and he got some fresh rabbits and he brought them to the king, always telling him that they were from the Marquis of Carabas. Well, a couple of weeks went by and the miller's son was starting to get impatient. Now, he had been waiting and waiting for Puss to help him get his money and find a home so that he would no longer have to go hungry. So Puss told him one day, "Go and take a bath in the river. Take off all of your clothes and just wade out into the river and go swimming." Well, the miller's son decided once again that he was going to listen to Puss, and that's exactly what he did. What he didn't know was that every day Puss had been watching the king and the princess go riding off in their carriage past the river, just in the spot where he told the miller's son to go bathing. Once the miller's son was in the river, Puss grabbed up his clothes and hid them. Then, when he saw the king's carriage going past, he screamed, "Help! Help! Some wicked thieves have stolen my master's clothes. Somebody help!" Well, the king, hearing all of this noise, decided to stop and get out. And when he saw Puss, he asked what was wrong. Puss told him his master was in the river and some thieves had stolen his clothes. So the king sent a servant back to the castle to get clothes for the Marquis, the miller's son, who he thought was the Marquis. And so the servants brought back a pair of beautiful fine clothes for the Marquis to wear. So now the Marquis not only had the fake title, but now he looked like royalty too. Now the princess got out of the carriage and she saw the Marquis and instantly fell in love with him. Well, the king and the princess invited the Marquis into their carriage with them to continue on their ride. Now, Puss, who still had a very good plan for how to get the Marquis money, decided to run ahead. Now, on the way, he passed by some farmers. And they were farming some wonderful land full of crops. And he told them, when a coach passes this way, if you are asked, let them know that this land belongs to the Marquis of Carabas. And then he showed him his razor-sharp claws and said, if you don't, I'll scratch you to pieces. So the farmers decided to all say that all of the crops and all of the land belonged to the Marquis. Well, Puss ran ahead even further until he got to another castle. Now this castle belonged, oh, a castle's falling. This castle actually belonged to an ogre, oh, a mean ogre, a very mean ogre who was the one who actually owned the farmland. There he is. Look how mean he looks, guys. Now, Puss knew that the king was going to pass by and that he was going to ask about the farmland. And so he knew that the ogre owned that land, but that the ogre was also magical. So Puss decided he was going to go in and speak to the ogre. So once he got in the castle, Puss came and he went to the ogre. He said, I hear you are an amazing magician. The ogre, who was quite proud of his abilities, said, yes, yes, I am. Puss asked, I hear you can transform into any animal you choose, but I don't believe that. Well, the ogre, wanting to impress Puss, said, name an animal and I will transform into it. So Puss thought, I bet you could not transform into a giant lion. But all the ogre did was turn himself into a giant lion. Puss pretended to be very impressed. That's amazing, he said, but I bet you could only turn into large animals. I bet you couldn't turn into small animals. The ogre told him he most certainly could, so he transformed into a tiny mouse. But Puss played a trick on the ogre. Once the ogre was a tiny mouse, Puss jumped on him and gobbled him up. Nom, 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 nom. And that was the end of the ogre. Now, the servants of the ogre's castle were so relieved that the ogre was gone that they would do anything Puss said. So Puss let them know that they would now be servants to his master, who was a very kind master and would treat them well. And he was to be called the Marquis of Carabas. And so the ogre's castle and all of his servants and all of his land would now belong to him. Well, in the meantime, the king's coach was driving past, and it passed farmers. And of course, the king, admiring all of the land and all of the beautiful crops, stopped and asked, whose fine land is this? Well, the Marquis of Carabas, said all of the farmers as the king passed. And the king grew even more impressed with the miller's son. Wow. They finally got to the castle, and the king and the princess and the miller's son all got out and went inside. And Puss had all of the servants waiting there ready to greet them. The miller's son was very surprised to have a castle all to himself. But, as always, he decided to go along with Puss's plan and pretend that he was the Marquis of Carabas, and this was now his castle and his servants and his land. Well, the king was so impressed that he turned to his daughter and said, "If you want, you may choose to marry this man." Well, the daughter had fallen in love with the Marquis and said, "Yes, I will absolutely marry him." And so, in the castle, the new Marquis and the princess lived happily ever after, and Puss never had to go hunting ever again unless he wanted to. The end. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me for that story. We are going to have a really fun activity for you guys in the post, but it is time to say goodbye now. So we're going to go ahead and do our goodbye song. And remember, it's going to go, goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends. It's time to say goodbye. Ready? Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends. It's time to say goodbye. Bye, everybody.